Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrew Power from Deloitte, and I'm here with colleagues from Deloitte and also from the World Economic Forum to talk about City Preparedness Scorecard. This is something that has been in gestation for a while. The idea here is to try and measure how prepared and resilient a city is in terms of natural disasters. So if we go into the first slide here, we'll quickly go through. So it's the concept is to create at a city level, not necessarily a country level, that looks at resilience to natural disasters. And resilience here, as we're defining, is both about the financial and physical ability to recover from natural disasters. And the purpose is to create some objective data that allows both the government, businesses to get together and talk about how you can actually improve this score and make a city more resilient to natural disasters. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today is, what that scorecard could be, what the components could be, talk about some of the data sources, and also invite from anyone here any thoughts about the scorecard and also data sources. So in terms of, what is this? So clearly this has to link into what are the natural disasters a city faces, because obviously some cities are more susceptible to wind, others to earthquakes, others to tsunami. So you have to set the context for what type of natural disasters there are going to be out there, and how, both in terms of the probability and severity of the risk at large. So what you can start to do is compare how cities, the hazards and the vulnerability are similar with each other. So, you've got to sort of agree. What you're trying to do here is obviously agree at a city level what the desired outcomes are in terms of resilience, have a way of measuring it, and then have some recommendations that help essentially get positive steps to get a city to be more resilient and improve their scorecard. Scorecard's really a measure. It's not meant to be necessarily a relative of how one city is doing versus another. It's a way of providing context and also then seeing if there's some improvement. So if we talk about just one, obviously the type of natural disasters that are faced vary significantly across the world, and this is just a 2010 looking at some of the major disasters that have occurred across the world, and you can see it varies a lot both in terms of severity and type. So we understand this scorecard obviously has to take into consideration those type of things. And if you go on to the next slide, the ultimate purpose here is if you can potentially increase a city's resilience, then you may be able to reduce the uninsurable risk, and therefore the burden doesn't fall so much on the public sector in order to pay out if there's natural disasters. So before, if a lot of the risks are uninsurable because you don't have the right building codes or other measures in place, then the insurable risk will be much lower. If you can get the right type of enablers in place, then potentially there's more insurable risk, and therefore the private markets, financial markets can absorb some of the losses as opposed to just relying on the state. Go to the next one. As probably you're well aware, obviously a scorecard like this has to take into account, it's not only the recovery from a natural disaster. Obviously, a lot of the actions you want to take is around risk mitigation, and the risk mitigation is one of the key aspects in terms of how you can move from something that's uninsurable to insurable. So when we're talking about the scorecard, it's not just how does a city recover from a natural disaster, but how does it prepare itself in advance. Now, in order to provide some clarity to that, World Economic Forum's got a regional meeting in East Asia in June. So one of the first cities we're using as a pilot is Jakarta. And just to show you on, if we go to the next one, just to show you on this is actually some figures from Munich Re. And if we look at Jakarta, they've said here are the various types of natural disasters, earthquake, volcano eruption, etc. And they've rated Jakarta as well as other cities in terms of A would be very, very likely, B is quite likely, and C is less likely, and if there's nothing, it's unlikely. And you'll see here what we've tried to do is say, what would Jakarta be like compared to, what could comparator cities be? So Manila and Mumbai have similar type of natural disaster potential natural disaster characteristics. And so there's a question, what can be learned from them and best practices shared. And then at the other end of the extreme, you have some cities like New York, for example, which may not have necessarily a similar type of risk profile from natural disasters, but you can learn because they're quite well prepared in terms of for the natural disasters they face. So if you look at the right-hand sort of panel, this sort of grid, you'll see here, based on this Munich Re data, in terms of what's the vulnerability to some major cities to natural disasters, and you see Jakarta is quite high, and what is the hazard itself, how great is the hazard, as you can see, as reflected in the recent unfortunate events in Japan. Tokyo Yokohama is very high in terms of hazard, though the vulnerability was slightly less in terms of the preparedness they've undertaken. So you can see Jakarta relatively has less hazard than some of these other cities, but for the hazards it faces, it's a bit more vulnerable because it's not necessarily, historically hasn't necessarily been as prepared. So one thing a scorecard can help do is sort of identify which are similar cities and what can be learned from similar cities, from each other, and also from best practice. In terms of talking about the scorecard itself at a city level, essentially we're talking about there are going to be 4 component parts. So it's going to be around education, governance, physical resilience, and financial resilience. And I'm going to actually start at the bottom because financial resilience would be the one where you can get most readily publicly available data. So we've just given a couple of examples here in terms of access to finance, in terms of, for example, government raising money either locally or nationally in face of a disaster, and the degree of insurance coverage available now. That's something that you can reasonably easily get publicly data on, and therefore assess where a city stands on that. Physical resilience, you can get some readily available in terms of quality of infrastructure, what's the building codes like. Others type of data is more difficult to get in terms of how well are various plans to rebuild the infrastructure in place and tested. And then when you get towards some of the other areas like education in terms of level of awareness and understanding of specific risks, obviously there tends to be much less sort of publicly available data, or at least publicly available data that's easy to sort of download across the world and things like that. So we see in terms of building the scorecard at a city level, it's going to be a combination of taking, first of all, agreeing the variables that go underneath each of these 4 pillars, but also then combining the combination of publicly available data and also then some things, whether it be around surveys, discussion groups at the local city level in terms of building this. So particularly what you're looking to do in terms of the scorecard is providing some type of objective view so everyone can coalesce and discuss how you improve various components of the scorecard, and over time you can start to see how successful your activities have been in terms of improving the scorecard results and things like that. If we go on to the next one. So as I was saying, the scorecard really is to help facilitate discussions about the preparedness of a city. We think it's relevant, obviously, for public sector, the national and local governments, for businesses, private sector, and the broader community. And each of those groups should be involved. On the right-hand side, we've got a list of the current participants who are working with the World Economic Forum. Deloitte to try and create some of these scorecards, and focusing initially on Jakarta and also on New York as a sort of look in terms of how a very developed and plan is versus something that's still being put together and things like that. So you can see the stakeholders, a combination of public institutions like UNICEF, the World Bank, some financial institutions like Swiss Re and HSBC, other organizations like Arup that deals with construction, Thomson Reuters obviously has a lot of data, and then some academic institutions like Wharton. So that's the sort of group that's working on this at this point. In order to give a couple of minutes of question, I think, can you go to the last slide? So I think what we're working with people at this point is to agree the scorecard components. I showed you the 4 high-level measures and then agreed the subcomponents underneath that, and working with various stakeholders to develop these illustrative scorecards for Jakarta and New York, and then present it in line with both the local government, business and community in Jakarta in June to start actually taking it into practice. So I'd very much, we've got a couple of minutes left, I'd very much welcome any comments or questions and thoughts if people think about either components, data sources, or whatever. Any? Tom, do you want to make it?
What should I say? So really this is a call to people out there and to welcome anyone who'd like to get involved further with this. The forum's using its platform to bring in its private sector participants and NGOs and civil society and mayors' offices in particular. And I think we heard yesterday in the session on the private sector that there's a need for such a platform to exist to start matching these offers and needs. And so we're using the forum's platform with our meetings, with our communities to try and develop precisely this tool to help further this, which we believe is an important part of reducing disaster risk.
I just had a really quick question. In the slide when you were talking about the 4 different areas, under physical resilience, you said you were looking at mitigation plans and response plans. I was wondering why response plans was part of physical resilience and not more education or governance. I was just wondering. I don't know if that's something you can answer.
On that specific point, it could be, for example, like ambulance response times, hospitals, and things like that. So that would be the physical part and things like that. You're absolutely right in terms of education. That's where we're saying the level of awareness comes in, because obviously if people are more aware in terms of both the impact of natural disasters, how to respond, then clearly that's related to education too. You're absolutely right. Please find us if you want to discuss this more.